Hello, I'm Ed,
And I'm Ben.
and this is What About Porridge? Welcome back. It's What About Porridge? It's the podcast where we unpack the messy, fascinating world of health and nutrition one topic at a time. I'm here as ever to ask the questions, and as always, I'm joined by Ben, nutritional therapist and resident expert on all things food, function, and the occasional digestive mystery. So settle in. Maybe this time grab an iron-rich snack. If you've not pre-soaked your liver, then maybe consider a quick clam, and let's get into it. Actually, just one thing I've just reminded myself about was I wanted to tell you before we start that since our last episode, I actually did soak and cook myself some liver. That's a sort of like living up to our podcast standards,
Excellent. It's
and
good
it
to hear.
worked. It was very nice.
Did it make it considerably more tasty?
Well, I don't really know because I'm not a sort of huge non-soaked liver eater, so maybe I'll need to do that as a comparison.
Hmm.
Um, but it was less kind of gamey than I expected it to be.
Yeah,
So yeah,
good.
recommend.
Right.
Would have again. And a quick reminder that we are now on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify and wherever you normally get your podcasts. Also, you're going to find details from this episode and our previous episodes can be found on our website, whataboutporridge.com. And you can also find our contact details there as well if you want to send in any more listener mail.
Yeah, and we've had some great feedback from our last episode where we tackled a whole bunch of questions from our listeners on topics ranging from chocolate to menopause. So thanks very much to everyone who's written in and keep your questions coming. And oh, yes, as a reminder before we start, nothing in this podcast should be considered medical advice.
Yes, very important.
Excellent.
Right. So, yes, in today's episode, we're going to tackle another question from our mailbag about meeting your nutritional needs on a vegetarian diet. And then we're going to dive into the murky world of seed oils and discuss why you might want to avoid them. And we'll end up returning to case studies from Ben's clinic in probably our next episode.
Yeah, we're lining up an interesting case of a 43-year-old female who was seeking help with low energy, anxiety, and stomach pains. And through various tests, we established that she had a parasite infection, which was
Not
exciting.
spoilers.
She also had maldigestion, bacterial overgrowth, and a condition called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which we uncovered doing some quite sophisticated blood tests. And yeah, there was some interesting back and forth with her GP as well. So stay tuned for that one.
Oh, okay, nice.
Right. So moving into our first topic for today, then we're going to start with a little quiz. So during the week, I asked Ed a question quite randomly. I said, "What do you think
Yeah,
is the
without any
nutritional?"
context that this was going to be featured on the podcast.
I asked Ed, "What do you think is the nutritional composition of a typical steak? In other words, what's the percentage of water, minerals, protein, fat, all that kind of thing, including saturated fat?"
Well,
And
no,
Ed did.
hold on. You asked me for water, protein, minerals, and saturated fat. And so
Okay.
so I'm now just upfront justifying why my numbers didn't add up to 100% because we assume that there's some other stuff too.
There's some other stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you did very well. So let's compare your answer to the real answer. So a steak is typically 71% water, and you said 70% water. So that's pretty good. But it's 21% protein, and you said 10%.
Okay.
Still pretty good. It's 6.5% fat. Uh, and you didn't really have a category for overall fat, so we'll let you off. It's 2% saturated fat, and you said 3%. So it's
Okay.
pretty good. You were spot on with minerals. It's 1% minerals. And interestingly, it's 0% carbs, but that's not really a surprise. So you did pretty well there.
Were you
And
surprised?
yeah, I thought you did exceptionally well. So yeah, but the protein content's quite interesting.
Yeah,
You
that was quite far
underestimated
off on
that.
that.
Mm. And I did do a bit of digging just out of interest in case anybody wrote in. So the cholesterol content was 64 milligrams, which is 0.064%. So yeah, just in case anybody really cares about that.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's our little quiz. Maybe we'll throw in some other quizzes.
Well, so did you not ask anyone else this question?
No, only you.
Okay. All right. Maybe we can, yeah, make a thing of this. Either you can continue asking me questions, or I'll get to ask you some questions, and
Oh,
we can
that'd be
feature them
great.
on
Yeah,
feature your answers on the podcast.
brilliant.
All right, good. So what, we're going straight into listener mail now, I think.
We are.
Yeah, so this was a kind of follow-up question to episode 3, where we talked about the optimum one-day meal plan that met the nutrient needs apart from vitamin D, which I think you've said generally you advise people to supplement. So our follow-up question was from Rocco in Balham, who asks, is it possible to meet your nutrient needs on a vegetarian diet? And I
Yes.
thought it might be fun to do this as a competition. So we've both created a chronometer vegetarian one-day meal plan, and we're just gonna, and neither of us have seen each other's attempts. So we're just going to compare them now.
It's going to be embarrassing if Ed turns out to be a
I
better
tr
nutritional therapist than me.
I tried very hard.
So for breakfast, Ed, what did you have?
I went with scrambled eggs with fried mushrooms and a glass of kefir.
Interesting. Okay, I wasn't a million miles away. I went for a spinach and mushroom frittata with Greek yogurt and berries.
Hmm,
So yeah. So for lunch then, I went with roasted vegetable and halloumi salad with avocado dressing.
very
What about
nice.
you?
I'm looking at your calories as well. Okay, interesting. Because I've gone for a much heavier lunch. So my
Whoa.
yeah, my lunch was dal makhni with curried carrots, and then for pudding, a tangerine, some whole milk yogurt, and I kind of cheated a little bit by having some nutritional yeast stirred into the curry.
I love it. So your lunch is nearly 1,000 calories, which is quite interesting compared
Yeah,
to
I
my
think, I mean, why even
700.
bother starting a meal if you're not going to have at least 1,000 calories? I don't get out of bed for less than 1,000 calories.
So what did you do for dinner then?
For dinner, I went with a broccoli and cheese soup with more nutritional yeast, and a dal with lentils and tomatoes. And then for pudding, some blueberries, some mixed nuts, and some more plain yogurt. And then,
Interesting. Okay.
oh yeah, so that was dinner. Yeah.
Well, for dinner, I went with a cauliflower rice stir fry with coconut cream curry and poached eggs, which kind of sounds a bit random, but I think it works. I have to say, I did heavily rely on eggs to get the protein content.
How many eggs have you got in the whole day?
I think 5.
Okay.
So yeah, we're going to put the recipes on the website so that people can dive into them if they're interested.
Yeah,
So
because
let's
I stuck
compare
to
the.
only eggs at breakfast, but I did do 4. Oh, and then
Okay.
I've done snacks. Do you have any snacks?
No,
All
I've
right.
missed out on snacks.
So my hypothetical vegetarian is having excellent snacks. I'm having some dark chocolate, and then the ultimate snack of just raw red peppers,
I love it.
which was
Excellent.
not at all because I was low on vitamin C.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I could have been more strategic with my snacking for sure. All right, so let's look at the big picture then, put them next to each other. So we'll very quickly do macros, but we're both much more interested in the micronutrients. So I missed my protein target. I only managed to get 70% of my protein needs, and that was even with the 5 eggs.
Yeah, so I was about the same. I got 107 grams of protein, and you got 105. So
Hmm.
yeah, we're basically identical.
Yeah, we're reasonably similar on carbs, although I went a slightly lower carb than you at 117 grams versus your 140. And
Oh,
then
that's
you were all
interesting.
about the
I
fat.
wonder where did all my carbs come from?
I don't know. It's your recipe.
Hold on. Let me have a look.
We can edit this bit out while people wait for you, Ed.
It's going to be worth the wait.
Okay. Everyone's on the edge of their seat.
Yeah.
Was it your bell peppers?
No, okay, it was the dals. I think
Yeah.
it's lentils basically.
Your two different dals. Okay. It's very
Yeah.
extravagant. Fat wise, then, bang on. We both had 150 odd grams of fat.
Yeah, that's okay. So that's very interesting. So they're really very different, other than okay, we both went heavy on eggs, but it's ended up being quite similar from a macro perspective.
Interestingly, that we both missed our protein target though. While we've been talking, I've added some snacks and tried to get my protein up to 100%. And in
Okay,
order
yeah,
to
so it'd
do
be
that,
interesting to see how far off you were or what would be required to get you up there.
yeah, so I added a snack which was Greek yogurt with almonds, and that's helped a bit. But I had to actually add four more eggs to get my protein target up to its 150 grams.
Which would what be nine eggs a day in total.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot.
So, or you'd be eating an awful lot of yogurt and nuts, and yours was relying on the lentils, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, I had two portions of yogurt and a portion of kefir, I think. So yeah, I went quite heavy on the cultured
Yeah.
dairy.
So it's worth saying we did lacto-ovo vegetarian.
Yeah.
So we gave ourselves that latitude, otherwise it was going to be very difficult. But we might continue this experiment next week and do vegan just for fun. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
And when I say next week, I clearly mean in
You
two
mean
months'
next?
time.
Yeah. Yep,
All
important.
right, so let's have a look then. Well, let's just go through some of your. I mean, I've basically hit all of my micronutrients in terms of vitamins, apart from vitamin D, which we've said that we're going to have to supplement. I think if we were being strict, ever so slightly shy on two of the B vitamins and vitamin E, ever so slightly shy. What about you?
Um, yeah, I think similar, but what's interesting is we're shy on different B vitamins.
Hmm,
So you
it's
missed
true.
B1, I got B1, you got B2, and I missed B2. So that's kind of interesting.
You're making it sound a lot like a war game of some kind.
Well, that's how I see nutrition, obviously.
Battleships. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's pretty good. So minerals then. Look at
No, but
that. We
I
both
guess
smashed it
what
out
I
of the
think is
park.
interesting about that, though, before we move on, is that that means that obviously there's a huge variety of vegetables in the world, and or different approaches to this. And if you can, even if we missed stuff on a particular day, if you can make up for it on other days by using something different, that's obviously going to be good.
Yeah, that's why this is a useful tool for tracking. And it probably is just interesting talking about iron for a minute as well. So on paper, I think we've both met our RDA for iron. Um, I can see that a big contributor to that in my meal plan certainly was the eggs, a bit from coconut cream and one or two other contributors. But like we've said before, just because on paper you're meeting that target doesn't mean it's getting absorbed and assimilated into the body. And so in my example, where I've got eggs and spinach, the oxalates in the spinach or other potential anti-nutrients, let's say, in the spinach might impair that absorption. So
Mm.
yeah.
And you've talked before about heme iron and non-heme iron, which typically seems to be about whether it's coming from animal sources. Is the iron that you're getting from eggs heme iron?
Yes.
Uh, nice.
So this is going to be an interesting challenge when we do the vegan one day meal plan and then we compare across the three.
Yeah.
So I think we both did quite well there.
Yeah, so go
Minerals
on
wise,
minerals. Yeah,
well, we both smashed it out of the park,
nailed
hit
it.
every single mineral. So that's pretty good. Is there anything else on here that stands out as being particularly interesting? We've already said that we've look at that. We've both exactly met 99% of our caloric needs.
That's good.
Hmm, very interesting. Well, that was very good. It was an interesting exercise. I think it's going to be a bit tougher if we do vegan, though.
Yeah.
So, what's the key takeaway from that then, Ed?
I think my key takeaway is it's challenging and it is possible to meet your micronutrient needs, although you end up, I think, relying quite heavily on dairy and eggs for certain micronutrients. And then for others, I think it becomes sort of all the more important to be having a really diverse. It becomes really important to eat lots of different vegetables because they've all got different nutritional profiles, and so you can quite easily end up missing something. I imagine that some of our vegetarian listeners might have some advice for us on alternative nutrient sources that go beyond eggs, but let's see, because we were both pretty reliant on eggs.
Yeah. Well, we can challenge ourselves to try and do it differently or better in the future.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, there you go, Rocco. That seems to be an answer to your question then. We've both managed it just, although I guess we're a little bit shy on the protein front. So
Yeah.
it'd be interesting.
So what's the potential implication of that if you're low on protein?
Well, on an ongoing basis, I mean, we talked about that in the first episode, didn't we? Like
Mm.
amino acid deficiencies over the long term. I mean, you're basically made from essential fats and essential amino acids. So all sorts of things are going to break down and go wrong. I refer our listeners to episode one.
Okay. Yeah. Always good to have a re-listen.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, that was interesting. I'm up for the challenge of doing the vegan one. Let's see.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Should you move us on?
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to our main topic of the day. So in previous episodes, we've talked mostly about what should you eat to be healthy, and we've talked about the need to provide your body with all of the essential nutrients for life. But today we're going to talk about what you shouldn't eat, and we're going to dive into the topic of polyunsaturated seed oils, or also known as vegetable oils, or sometimes referred to as industrial seed oils.
Yeah. So in episode three, we outlined some principles for an optimum diet, which included cook with healthy fats. And in the last episode, I said that the healthiest fats to cook with were things like goose fat and coconut oil. And I said that you really shouldn't go anywhere near these vegetable oils like sunflower oil or corn oil. And some of our listeners were a bit shocked by that. So we really had to address this topic. When we're talking about this, we're really talking about the 8 oils that are most commonly used in cooking and industrial food production, which are canola, corn, cottonseed, soybean, sunflower, safflower, grapeseed, and rice bran oil.
Nice. And I'm assuming that each of these probably have some sort of upmarket kind of cold pressed or extra virgin version of them. Are you kind of including that in the discussion?
That's a good point. A lot of them do have a cold pressed alternatives, which are quite different, and they're out of scope for this episode because we want to avoid it being 3 hours long. So I have to strictly avoid going down as many rabbit holes as possible.
Okay, but there will be some rabbit holes, I assume. I hope.
Most definitely.
Excellent. Okay, so Ben, why don't you start by providing a bit of background?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty hard to cover this topic without talking a bit about the structure of fats. So this is probably a good time to go make a cup of tea, and I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. Maybe
Go
we
for
should
it.
call this the sleep episode.
Mm.
Don't listen to it while you're driving. Anyway, so fats, which are known as lipids, are primarily made of glycerol and 3 fatty acids, hence the name triglycerides. And triglycerides are the main form of fats in our foods and in our bodies. So these fatty acids are essentially long chains of carbons linked together like beads on a string. And in biochemistry and nutrition, we talk about fats being saturated or unsaturated. And saturated fatty acids are ones where all of the carbon atoms are bonded to hydrogen atoms, which results in a straight chain, whereas unsaturated fatty acids have one or more double bonds. which are between the carbon atoms, which causes a bend in the chain. And that means that saturated fatty acids, like coconut oil, are solid at room temperature, whereas unsaturated fats, like sunflower oil, are liquid at room temperature. And unsaturated fats can either be monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. So monounsaturated fats, like olive oil, have one double bond, and polyunsaturated fats have two or more double bonds. And the names, omega-6 and omega-3, simply tell us where the double bonds are positioned on the chain. So that feels like more than enough chemistry for this episode as this background.
Okay, I must admit I've let some of that sort of wash over me, but my takeaway is that there are two types of fat, or you can categorize fats in two ways, into saturated and unsaturated. The most visible thing about that being that saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature and unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. And then that there are two essential fatty acids, the omega-6 and omega-3.
So yeah, that's a good summary. So both omega-6 and omega-3 are polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are sometimes abbreviated to PUFAs, but it's omega-6 that are found in the seed oils. So that's the subject for today.
Good. Okay, we might have to dig into PUFAs a bit more at some point.
Okay.
All right, good. So, why then are we talking about this? What's the problem? Does it really matter what fat we eat?
Right, that's a really good question. So let's just do a tiny bit more context then. So every cell in the human body has a cell membrane, which acts like a flexible protective barrier. And these membranes provide structural support and insulation. They control what enters and exits the cell. They serve as attachment sites for proteins that regulate the function of the cell. And they enable communication between cells and their immediate environment. And all of this makes dietary fats absolutely crucial for maintaining the proper structure and function of every cell in our bodies. So yes, it really does matter what mixture of fats you have in your body. And I think it's just important to note that our national dietary guidelines, which were introduced in the US in 1980 and in the UK in 1983, advise us to eat a low-fat diet. And the reason everyone was shocked by my recommendation to cook with beef dripping and coconut oil was because these fats are known to be high in saturated fat.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about this before a little bit, but certainly coming into this, my natural bias would be to say, well, generally, if something is high in saturated fat, then don't eat that.
Yeah, and I hope that by the end of this podcast, people will understand why it really is saturated fats that you want to cook with.
Interesting. Okay, and so then how does this lead into the discussion about vegetable oils?
Well, I believe that proponents of vegetable oils have done the following. They've observed that among Western populations in particular, rates of cardiovascular disease, that's heart attacks and strokes, have increased dramatically since the early 1900s and are now the leading cause of death worldwide. And to try to answer the question, why is this happening? They formed the hypothesis, which is known as the diet-heart hypothesis, also known as the lipid hypothesis or the cholesterol hypothesis. And this hypothesis proposes that there's a direct relationship between dietary fat intake, particularly saturated fat and cholesterol, and the development of heart disease. So it
Yeah, I mean
suggests
that's pretty well sort of embedded in the consciousness, isn't it? I mean,
very
I
well
th
embedded in the consciousness. Yeah.
I
Hence
definitely
people's reaction.
yeah, exactly. Okay, I think that sort of it's almost yeah, no, not even a yeah, it's not even a kind of conscious decision making, but just while I'm wandering around the supermarket looking at things, the things that you think, oh, that's healthy, are going to be the things that are
Yeah,
um
well, we even have this traffic light system, don't we, on the products in the supermarket
yeah, true.
that glow red when something's high in fat,
Yeah.
especially saturated fat. So the hypothesis suggests that consuming high amounts of these fats leads to an increase in blood cholesterol, specifically low density lipoprotein, which is known as LDL cholesterol, and that in turn contributes to the formation of atherosclerotic plaque in the arteries. But I'm going to just say up front that I believe that the diet heart hypothesis is at best oversimplistic, but more likely just totally wrong. And I believe that it's the thrombogenic hypothesis that correctly explains the pathogenesis of cardiovascular disease. But I'm well aware that that's a rabbit hole we can't go down. So that's going to be coming up in a future episode, I think.
Okay, so the supporters of vegetable oils would say then that they're good for your heart and that consuming more vegetable oil rather than saturated fat would be a good thing because that's going to mean that you're less likely to have cardiovascular disease.
That's right. Yeah. So if you look at some of these nutritional bodies, like the NHS says, there's good evidence that replacing saturated fats with some unsaturated fats can help lower your cholesterol level. And the
Hmm.
National Library of Medicine says polyunsaturated fats can help lower your LDL, brackets, bad cholesterol. And then it goes on to describe cholesterol in a helpful way. Cholesterol is a soft, waxy substance that causes clogged or blocked arteries, which we're going to totally
You're
debunk in a
laughing.
few.
Okay,
Uh,
interesting.
we'll debunk that thoroughly in a future episode. And then it says having low LDL cholesterol reduces your risk of heart disease. And this claim that replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, reducing LDL cholesterol, is actually true. And we understand the mechanism for that. Basically, these polyunsaturated fats contain plant sterols that have a very similar structure to cholesterol, and they compete for absorption in the intestine, leading to less cholesterol being absorbed into the body and incorporated into the cell walls. So that's well understood. And you'll often come across people that are taking plant sterols specifically to lower their cholesterol, which again, well, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's just carry on. So proponents of seed oils go a stage further. They claim that the reduction in LDL cholesterol leads to a reduction in cardiovascular disease.
Right. Okay. So is there then good evidence for that? That I guess that you might at least be some observational studies that people who eat more vegetable oils have less cardiovascular disease.
Well, there's actually evidence on both sides, so it's not a totally one-sided debate. And I'll talk about the evidence that didn't show any benefit in a minute. But just as an example, there was a 2010 meta-analysis that showed that consumption of these PUFAs as a replacement for saturated fatty acids did reduce coronary heart disease events, so heart attacks and strokes, by 19%.
Hmm.
And that was, based on 13,000 participants. So, a reasonable sample size.
But again,
But
that's an observational study, not a um, randomized control trial.
no, they were RCTs. There were
Oh,
8
right.
different RCTs.
Right. Nice.
So, yeah. So there is some evidence there. But like I said, there's evidence on both sides. But that's
Hmm.
really not my central argument. My central argument is what's the point in lowering your risk of cardiovascular disease if you're going to increase your risk of other diseases like cancer? And there's high quality causal evidence to say that that's exactly the case.
Right.
So in 1961, the American Heart Association decided to adopt the first policy in the world telling people to reduce saturated fats and replace them with these polyunsaturated seed oils as a way to prevent heart disease. The problem was that at that time, there was basically no evidence for this. So following the recommendation in 1961, there were a series of very large clinical trials that took place in multiple countries around the world, including places like Finland and Norway and Australia, as well as the UK and the US.
And just practically, what would that have looked like at the time? So people were cooking more traditional diets back then in the early 60s than they're eating now, less processed foods and things, I would imagine. And they're cooking what mostly with butter and
well, the participants would have been asked to substitute whatever they were using before, as you say, butter, lard, so on,
yeah,
with with these polyunsaturated fats.
right. So yeah, lard is a good shout. That's kind of thing that's gone almost completely out of fashion now.
Yeah. And so these were very large clinical trials, and in total there were about 76,000 people. And first of all, these trials didn't actually show that going on the vegetable oil diet lowered your risk of heart disease. So that's the first finding. But what a number of these trials did find is that the people consuming the higher vegetable diet, the higher vegetable oil diet, died at significantly higher rates of cancer. In at least half a dozen of these trials, they showed that if you lowered your cholesterol, either through diet or through drugs, your rate of cancer would increase. And this was the most rigorous type of evidence that we have. In one 9-year trial, which was called the Multiple Risk Factor Intervention Study, they had participants replace butter with margarine, but they found out that the group that had gotten more vegetable oils had significantly higher rates of lung cancer. And that was despite the fact that 21% of the people in the intervention group had actually quit smoking compared to just 6% of the controls. And the National Institutes of Health were so concerned about this results, which were consistently coming up in these trials, that they held a series of very high-level meetings in 1981, 1982, 1983, 1985, and 1990, where they assembled the very top scientists to try and understand what was going on. And despite having a number of ideas, they really couldn't explain why these rates of cancers were increasing and this cancer risk was present in these trials. And so they simply said the importance of lowering cholesterol for the prevention of heart disease is so important that they're going to ignore these cancer findings.
In terms of their sort of population level recommendations.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting because this was consistently found. So if you look at clinical trials across populations, for example, in Japan, where they have low levels of cholesterol, again, you see higher levels of stroke and higher rates of lung cancer. So there's definitely a question to be answered there and a big cause for concern.
Okay, so this feels like it's still a bit of an open question, despite this being something that's been running since the kind of early 60s, where you're saying basically it's not clear whether the reduction in LDL cholesterol that you get from having more seed oils or more unsaturated fats actually then results in lower cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, that's an open
And
question.
it also seems to be an open question, even if it does cause lower rates of cardiovascular disease, does that benefit outweigh a potential increase in cancer risk?
Yeah. And there's, that's high quality data, 76,000 people, and it showed up in more than half a dozen of those trials. So yeah, it's a very significant concern. It's not the only concern.
Okay, so maybe let's dig into that then for a bit. What other issues do you see?
Yeah, so one of the other big problems with vegetable oils is that they cause oxidation, and oxidation leads to inflammation. So going back to the biochemistry that we talked about earlier, these are unstable molecules because multiple double bonds can open up, especially when exposed to light or heat. And when they open up, they can attach to oxygen. And for several decades, we've been told about the importance of antioxidants to counter this oxidative stress. And that's because oxidation drives inflammation, and chronic inflammation is known to be a risk factor for cancers like colorectal cancer, breast cancer, and prostate cancer. But also chronic inflammation is a driver of a whole host of diseases that include autoimmune diseases, skin diseases, asthma, arthritis, and incidentally, in that list is cardiovascular disease. So we've come full circle to this whole thing of there's a specific component in a food that lowers LDL cholesterol, therefore we should recommend it. But if you're consuming high levels of these oils, which is the recommendation, and they're driving inflammatory processes in the body, then you're opening yourself up to a whole host of disease conditions. So why would you take them to reduce the odds of one disease when you're opening up the risks of all of these other diseases, one of which is cardiovascular disease? So it sort of doesn't make any sense to me. So we're back to this whole thing of you should eat oats because they contain beta glucans, and beta glucans can lower LDL cholesterol. But oats are very high in carbohydrates, and we know that within 6 hours of raised blood sugar, the glycocalyx, which is the delicate lining of the arteries, is damaged, which is a direct precursor to thrombogenesis. So we've come full circle, and we're now back at the real cause of cardiovascular disease, which is the thrombogenic hypothesis. In other words, things that damage the epithelial lining, the delicate lining of the arteries. So, I don't even know what to say about that.
I guess, okay, so I think my takeaway from this would be that the evidence really needs to look at outcomes. So I guess all cause mortality,
Yes.
because there's so many different interweaving pieces to the puzzle that, even if we accept that LDL cholesterol is causing heart disease, and that beta glucans in oats lower LDL cholesterol, they also do other things, and those other things may also cause heart disease.
Right.
Um, so so measuring just LDL cholesterol levels is not very useful. You actually have to measure, did people get heart disease, which, as we've kind of talked about, is then much more difficult to measure, unfortunately, because you have to run much longer studies and all the rest of it.
Yeah. You don't want to look at a single biomarker. You need to look at primary endpoints, as you say, like all-cause mortality. So yeah. Yeah. So let's cover one or two of the other critiques of seed oils then. So I said that when they're heated, they oxidize, and we've talked about some of the problems with that. But they also degrade into other compounds called perioxidation products, which are highly reactive and potentially damaging compounds. And some interesting research by doctors at the University of Minnesota showed that it's possible to isolate more than 100 of these different volatile chemicals from a single piece of fried chicken. And the compounds were shown to be absorbed into the bloodstream and to cross the blood-brain barrier. And one of the categories of these toxic chemicals is aldehydes, one of which is acrolein, which are present in cigarettes, which is why you've seen people on social media comparing seed oils with cigarettes, which, I'm not sure is a particularly useful comparison, but you get the point that, you've got all of these compounds. Why would you want them in your bloodstream? Seems a little bit risky. And these toxic volatile compounds have actually been a huge problem for the fast food restaurants like McDonald's and Burger King, because they become aerosolized in the fryers, and they've had to develop new cleaning products that are strong enough to clean the walls in the kitchens. And they've developed these nitrogen blankets to put on top of the fryers to absorb the compounds. And they put these little silicon beads in the oil to absorb the oxidation products as they're created. And here's a fun story for you. These volatile compounds accumulate on the uniforms of the workers. And when they send those uniforms to the cleaners, they're so caped in these compounds that there have been occasions where they spontaneously combust in the back of the trucks on the way to the cleaners.
What?
And and even after they've been cleaned, they still contain such high levels of these volatile substances. They've also been known to combust spontaneously in the dryers.
Okay. I mean, citation needed for extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
So,
I want videos of that.
so fact checkers at the ready, But it's an interesting story that I came across while I was researching this.
Love it. Okay, very good.
So it's also worth making one more point about inflammation, which is that human beings evolved eating a diet with a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids of roughly 1 to 1, whereas in Western diets today, that ratio is anywhere from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1. And in some people, it's been shown to be as high as 25 to 1.
As
And
in, so they're
obviously,
getting 25 times more omega-6 than they are omega-3.
exactly right. Yeah. And obviously, this is totally unprecedented in our, 4 or 5 million years of hominid evolution. And it's shocking when you realize that Americans now get 20% of their calories from a single food source, which is soybean oil.
Right.
And I'll link to a paper from our website which examines the impact of these unprecedented fatty acid ratios on things like cardiovascular disease, cancer, inflammatory diseases, and autoimmune diseases, because I think it's a very good um, assessment of the evidence.
And so, just coming back to the omega-3 and omega-6 thing, just to make that 100% clear, you're saying that the um, omega-6s are coming from things like soybean oil, so the seed oils that we've been talking about. And where would omega-3s be coming from?
Well, typically omega-3s are especially rich in oily fish and fish oil. Um, and omega-6 fats, if you were going to get them from a natural diet, would come from meat, eggs, fish, and dairy products. But what I'm saying is that we're not eating a natural diet. We've introduced these novel, highly processed vegetable oils, and the impact is there for everyone to see, I think.
Right. Okay. So it's not that omega-6 is sort of bad in itself. It's that I guess it's almost the kind of concentration of it into these oils is much higher than that you'd naturally find it in whole foods.
Yeah, it comes back to the ratio. And let's just cover one last very quick critique of seed oils. And that's that they're very high in calories, but they're really poor sources of nutrients. They contain virtually no minerals and only vitamin E and vitamin K.
Compared to, I guess if you were cooking with lard or something instead, that'd be a better source of nutrients.
Well, if you were cooking with grass-fed butter, you'd be getting vitamin A and like a much broader spectrum of fat-soluble vitamins.
All right, good discussion. I think that brings us pretty much to the end. Any kind of final thoughts from you or conclusions?
Yeah, for me, this is a bit like a court case, and really it's about establishing reasonable doubt. And I hope that we've done that. Um, because for me, it's this question of, even if seed oils lower your risk of cardiovascular disease, do you really want to trade the risk of a heart attack or stroke with the risk of getting cancer? And personally, I'd rather have a heart attack.
Lovely. I mean, I'd rather you had neither, personally. But I guess, I mean, it's interesting because you're getting qu quite definitive advice from, you quoted the NHS at the beginning who, with their guidance, and that's not hedged in any way, is it? So, I don't know what my question is. It's, I suppose, if this episode has created doubt in your mind, what would you recommend that people do with that doubt when they're making choices about how to cook their food?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think people do need to be informed and figure it out for themselves, because, as you say, there's a there's a very strong party line, and yeah, that makes it very difficult to go against that. But I think if you've been convinced by this podcast and you want to avoid those harms, then there's a few things you should do. Firstly, you should cook with these fats that are fully saturated, because they basically they can't oxidize. So you've got things like coconut oil, beef dripping, duck fat, goose fat, and butter you should cook with.
And my
And I
favorite
would
ghee is my favorite.
ghee, you're exactly right. And interestingly, I've started cooking recently with MCT oil, which is a derivative of coconut oil, which has no taste and has other benefits. So
Hmm.
that's been good. And as a result of having done this research, I'd also suggest that people don't heat olive oil or avocado oil at all, and only use them as salad dressings and those kinds of things. And I'd also
And why is
scrutinize
that?
well, there's still some potential for them to oxidize when exposed to light and heat. So you want to just minimize that risk.
Fair enough.
And I would also really scrutinize the ingredients on all of the things in the supermarket that we all know are pretty unhealthy. But things like biscuits and crisps, you're gonna see rapeseed oil on these items, and you should really limit the consumption of them. And to be honest, if something says partially hydrogenated oil on the label, you should put it back immediately.
That feels like another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You
So
mentioned olive oil there, though, briefly. That was one thing we didn't talk about. It's obviously is, well, olives are what, a fruit rather than a vegetable, but it's a non-animal oil and is liquid at room temperature. So what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, well, olive oil is predominantly a monounsaturated fat. Mono meaning that it has one double bond, and therefore it still can oxidize a little bit, much less than polyunsaturated fatty acids. But the advice with olive oil is to not buy the stuff that's that sort of clear straw yellowy color, but buy the stuff that is extra virgin. It'll have a green tinge, maybe quite a strong green tinge, and it will be cloudy. And what you're really seeing there is all the polyphenols. And so, although I personally, at this point in my understanding, would not go heating olive oil at a high temperature, I certainly wouldn't use it for anything like stir frying. If you are going to cook with it, sort of medium low temperatures, if you're cooking with this cloudy polyphenol rich olive oil and it starts to break down somewhere near its smoke point, what's actually going to happen is your polyphenols are going to cancel out some of the free radicals that get formed. And that's because they donate an electron. So they help to essentially dampen the oxidation reaction that's happening. So, it goes some way to mitigating the risk because you're buying such a high quality oil that if you do start to if it does start to become impaired due to heat exposure, then its inherent polyphenol content starts to damp down the free radicals.
Hmm, that's super interesting.
So yeah, so buy really good quality olive oil, keep it in a dark place, nowhere near any heat, and use it up quite quickly. Don't keep it in the cupboard for years and years. So that means buy a small bottle.
That's because it'll oxidize.
Yeah, slowly but surely.
Hmm.
And I suppose one other tip then for high temperature cooking is I would use, if I was going to, let's say, do a stir fry using that example, I'd use something called Biona coconut cuisine, which is coconut oil that doesn't have any taste or flavor of coconut, and that can withstand high temperatures. So yeah, that would be a useful tip. I can link to it from the website.
Lovely. Sounds very good. Well, I do quite like the taste of coconut. But
Well, maybe not if you're stir frying something, non-coconutty.
yeah, fair enough. I've used
So,
coconut for making coconut oil for making popcorn from scratch. That works really
ah,
well.
okay. Yeah, I think I'd use MCT oil for that. But yeah, sometimes you do want a little hint of coconut. It's quite nice. Actually, a lot of this is summarized in a really nice infographic that we should link to from the website, which shows the different types of fat for cooking and some of their components, which is, I think, quite a nice thing to refer to.
Perfect. All right, let's stick it on there.
Great. Any
All
closing
right.
thoughts from you, Ed?
Um,
Have you been convinced? Reasonable doubt?
oh, you definitely introduced introduced doubt. I feel like my conclusion or my closing thought is just that it's quite disappointing that we're okay, it's 2025. The advice that you quoted originated in what, 1961. So here we are 64 years on, and there doesn't seem to be great quality evidence pointing either way. And you'd have thought, really, we should have that by now.
Yeah, you really would. And listeners that want to dive into that rabbit hole could get in touch, maybe some follow-up questions, and maybe we'll go down a few of those rabbit holes. But it is that's why we called it the murky world of seed oils. It's a murky topic.
Yeah.
Can't speak.
I think I probably might also, I guess if I can share what I would probably plan to do for myself, I reckon that, inevitably I will get, plenty of seed oils in my diet just through eating packets of crisps and things occasionally. So probably the thing to do is to not use them in my home cooking just on the basis of, diversity and if it's not completely clear what's going to cause a problem and what isn't, then I suppose just try and get as much of a balance as possible, get as many different fat sources as possible, probably is a good thing. And so, yeah, if I avoid seed oils in my own home cooking, then at least that's providing some sort of balance with what I'm getting when I eat from other sources.
That sounds like a very sensible takeaway. So just one more option that's probably worth mentioning, because I do this with some clients in the clinic, is that you could actually do some testing and find out what fatty acids are actually present in your blood and in what ratios. So you could do something called an essential fatty acids panel, which is about 175 pounds, but you'd have to work with a practitioner. That would be a very thorough way of doing it. You'd look at the breakdown of each of the omega-3 fats, the omega-6 fats. It would look at omega-9s, omega-7s, your saturated fatty acids. And then you'll see a section called cardiovascular risk. And underneath that, you'll be looking at things like omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And you want that right down in that kind of around 4. So you want that pretty low.
Four
And
to
then
one.
you'll also, yeah, 4 to 1, yeah. And then down in that ratio, down in that little section, you'll have the omega-3 index. And those are quite useful tests if you want to go the whole hog and work with a practitioner. But there are these at-home test kits that you can get, and these vary from sort of about 130 pounds right down to about 50 pounds. And there's a company that I've used a lot for at-home finger prick blood testing that provide one of these. So the company is called Thriver, and they do an
Not a sponsor.
omega-3 and not a sponsor, but they do an omega-3 and omega-6 test. It does 2 biomarkers. It does the omega-3 index, which measures the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in your red blood cells. And interestingly, again, that's listed as a biomarker for cardiovascular disease risk. But it also will say your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So this is something you can do at home. It's about 130 pounds. And again, you can assess some of these risk factors for yourself. And I guess the key thing to look out for is, if your diet consists of high amounts of these vegetable oils, let's say that routinely you're eating a packet of crisps and maybe one of these, sort of cereal bar, snack bars, which very often have high levels of vegetable oils in them, then you might find that you come back very high on some of these ratios, and that would be a cause for concern. So that's probably a kind of practical take home if people want to look into it further.
Yeah, very nice.
So I think a final takeaway from me for this episode is that if you have a known inflammatory disease, so maybe you have asthma or inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatoid arthritis or some sort of inflammatory kind of skin condition or anything like that, then I think it's a very sound policy or piece of advice to reduce your omega-6 intake and increase your omega-3 intake. Ideally, you would do that from cold water fatty fish, and that would help dampen down this inflammation in the body. And one of the interesting things is that lots of clinical studies show a strong and consistent relationship between inflammatory markers, again, that you can test for, something called high sensitive C-reactive protein. I test in lots of my clients because it's a broad marker of chronic inflammation in the body. These are known cardiovascular disease risk markers. And we know that this atherosclerosis sort of pathogenesis is a pro-inflammatory state. So, you don't want chronic low-grade inflammation going on in the body. And so I think it's a really sound policy to to decrease omega-6, whether it's cooking oils or that bag of crisps you have every day as part of lunch, and increase omega-3s, which have an anti-inflammatory effect in the body. So yeah, cold water fatty fish would be the ideal source, or a lot of people now take fish oil. So yeah. So do you want to just give out our email address, Ed, in case people want to get in touch?
Yeah, I don't remember what it is. Is it hello?
It's hello@whataboutporridge.com.
Very good. How could I forget? Well, I guess let's leave it there then.
Thanks, Ed. It's been a good one.
Perfect. All right. See you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to the next one.
Bye.